Some of the research I saw recently is only 1 in 20 families pass on more wealth than what they inherited. The stakes just got a whole lot higher. When you're talking 3.5 trillion, we can't afford for this to be happening any longer. The rising gen, the next gen, in many situations have been very well educated. So they've gone to private schools, they've gone to universities. But an aspect that's really been missed is their financial acumen.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change.
Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Our conversation today is slightly different. Did you know that 70% of businesses in Australia are family-run businesses and they employ over 50% of Australian employees? And that we are also seeing the largest generational wealth transfer in Australian history. We're not talking small dollars, we're talking over $3.5 trillion. And what I found interesting is that it is estimated that 70% will lose inherited wealth by the second generation of family businesses and 90% by the third generation. Grant Thornton has a very proud history of supporting family businesses in advisory, research, tax, and much, much more. Their latest research on family business covered topics such as leaving your legacy, succession planning, future growth, and diversity. So we reached out to Kirsten Taylor Martin, who is a partner and national head of family business consulting, to discuss this latest research and some of the key points around each of their research items. Enjoy this fascinating conversation with Kirsten. Hello, Kirsten. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you this morning?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you today because it's a very different topic talking about family businesses. And you work with Grant Thornton. Tell us a little bit more about that business.
Yes, so at Grant Thornton, we have accredited family business advisors. We are incredibly passionate about families being able to continue their legacy for generations to come. Currently in Australia, only 12% of family businesses make it to the third generation, and that's something that we really want to change and help family businesses to navigate that transition. So the major areas that we do a lot of work in is firstly succession planning, so passing the baton from one generation to the next, and that can include both in ownership and also management of the business. Secondly, family governance structure, which is quite a formal way of saying helping the families communicate with one another. So we facilitate the conversations. A lot of what we're going to be talking about today and what we talk with family businesses is really hard conversations to have. And sometimes it's just easier to have that person there to help ask the questions. So it's very much around what if this was to occur, what would good look like? Because whilst the family is all getting on quite well, they can really put some thought into it and some structure into it so that if anything does ever occur in the future, they've all agreed and they know what good can look like. Because for most families, at the end of the day, they want to be able to celebrate and come together in important occasions during the year. They don't want that family harmony to be disrupted by a business. The third thing that we help with is estate planning. So we're not solicitors, we don't do the legal documentation, but what we find is only 34% of family businesses actually have an estate plan that's aligned with their succession plan. So an example of that is I met a business the other day and we have two sister-in-laws running the business together, and they can't stand one another. Now, I'm sure when the two brothers were running the business, that was never their vision for the future, and they probably had a really clear vision. But then they both went to solicitors and asked for their wills to be done, leaving everything to their wives. And this is how family businesses don't make it to that third generation. So we help in aligning the vision, putting a document together so the solicitors get all the information and their estate plan is then aligned to their vision and their succession plan. And lastly, but not least, the rising gen is the future of all family business. So we help and provide a financial acumen course to assist them in ensuring they're ready to take over the wealth and the family business.
Really interesting. I didn't realize that 12% of family businesses don't make it past the third generation. But as you've just described, one of the issues is they probably don't get along after that many generations. But how many?
We also got a lot more people as well. And that's where
true.
that family governance piece, it sounds quite simple being able to communicate with one another. But at the moment, we're seeing 3 generations in a family business at one point in time and 4 generations alive. That's a lot of people that need to be communicating and all need to be on the same page.
Yeah, yeah. So how many family businesses, or what percentage of the market makes up family business in Australia?
70%, and they employ 50% of employees.
Wow. So 70% of our businesses are family-run businesses and they employ 50% of people.
When people think family business, they think small. So they think the little corner shop.
Yeah.
But family businesses are small, medium, and large. So there's a lot of national large family businesses.
Now, you did a recent survey where you decided to shine a light on family business, and there were 4 key things or four key areas in the survey that you looked at. What were those 4 things?
It was around leaving your legacy and how we can assist in that, succession planning, the future growth of family businesses, and also diversity within family business.
So let's start with legacy, because there's often a mindset that there's an automatic stewardship that we can leave behind in family businesses. We just, the firstborn son or the oldest child, male or female, is going to take over the business for us. And quite often the generations see things very, very differently. So how does legacy mindset change from generation to generation from what you guys see?
Yeah, so what we saw with the survey, and I found this really quite fascinating with the results from the survey, but the first and second generation of the family business, they consider themselves owners. So the mindset really shifted once we got into third and fourth generation, because at that point in time, they were really starting to consider themselves as stewards. So the third generation also had a very strong focus on the community impact, which speaks to what family businesses are all about, giving back to their local communities and helping and having employees from their local community. And the fourth generation had a real emphasis on legacy. And that also included philanthropy as well, and really creating a change and making a legacy for their family. And the reason I think this is really important is when we are putting together sort of rules and talking about what if and what does the future look like for your family, obviously you've got to have that conversation more than once, because that first and second generation with an ownership mindset, they're very much going to be open to sale of their family business. And once you start to want that legacy, it's going to be a very different conversation. So you've got to sort of reset everything and ask all those, what does good look like? And what if this was to occur questions all over again, because the family's starting to shift that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Does a third and fourth generation have that shift because the business is more established financially in particular and market share?
I would say that's a large reason for it, yes. And also they usually have a fair bit of wealth outside of the family business as well.
And how does the governance play a role when we shift from one generation to the next?
It's really ensuring that we're keeping the family unit together and all family members in the conversation. So the first generation, they really run their business by some family values. And it's how do you pass those family values and that on to the next generation. And also we need to remember that often in the second generation and future generations, not every family member will be working in the business. So how do you keep the family members that are outside of the business still in the conversation and still engaged and still wanting that family business to continue for future generations?
What happens in family businesses, small, medium, or large, if you get to the second or third generation and the family members are just not interested in running the business anymore, or they don't have the capability of doing it? What quite often happens in those instances?
Oh, look, there's a couple of different scenarios. The first one is we do see a number of family businesses who do employ someone to run the business. So it can still be a family business and still family owned with no employees actually, like no family actually working in the business. So they can find the right person for the job to run it. The thing that I find can often be an issue is just the family values. How do you find someone that has your family values and runs the business the way that your family wants them to? So what I have found over the years is I've seen many family businesses tell this fabulous story about how they've got an external person in and they've run the business. And then I see the same family business like 2 or 3 years later and the family members back in and they'll say it didn't work out because we had different sort of family values. So when recruiting the person, it's not just the skill set, but the family values. And for that person, they also need to understand that the family still has a say in the whole business. So it's not like they can really totally run it all their own way. They need to be very respectful to the family. But if it's done right, it can work. And what the other thing that we are also seeing is that in many situations, it can actually skip a generation. So if one generation's not interested, and particularly with an aging population, it's sort of enabling us to be able to do that as well. But you need to be very careful with skipping a generation and the communication around that, because obviously it can create a lot of resentment.
I noticed that talking about succession planning next, which is one of the other key themes from your survey, that only 15% of family businesses have no succession plan in place. I would have thought that would be a lot higher. Am I right in assuming that a lot of maybe the smaller family businesses don't have a succession plan, or smaller businesses don't, but the larger ones do?
Yes, and I think that's possibly where our survey gets a little bit distorted, in the sense that a lot of the family businesses that would be answering our questions are probably a lot more sophisticated in what they're doing. And the reason for that is a lot of the smaller businesses don't understand that there are family business consultants out there that can actually assist them. So a lot of the problems that they go through, they just feel very isolated and very alone. So it's the community that are aware that there's advisors and you can get help that would have responded to our survey. So I'd say, like what you've just suggested, it probably is higher than that. It was just that of the audience that we surveyed, only 15% had no plan in place.
When do you start the succession plan process?
Look, I always encourage family businesses, they should always have one, because the big issue is that everyone thinks that it relates to retirement, but it doesn't. Because, and like a really sad story, but I heard many years ago, but it always stays in my mind. But a father, he hadn't explained anything about the business to his wife or to his children. They were all at university or just out of university, so they were reasonably young. And he went out for a motorbike ride on a Sunday and was killed. And there was his family business where not one family member knew anything about the business. And the issue that you have, and the family were talking about it, but the banks like to know that you've got some sort of succession plan. So they wanted to foreclose the loans because they didn't believe the business could continue. The employees didn't know if they had a job. The father at that point in time didn't have supplier contracts in place. So they had suppliers saying that they were owed money, and they later learned that they weren't owed money. So they're dealing with the tragic of the passing of their father, trying to keep this business alive, and everyone's trying to get money out of them, which is just such a sad situation. But that story always stays with me, because you want to plan just in case. So, and a lot of, and in that instance, the children probably weren't ready. They weren't old enough. They weren't sophisticated enough. But in many family businesses, they have a long-term employee, whether that be the the CFO or a general manager or something, just having in place, if anything was to happen to, in that situation, the father, that they would step in and mentor the children until the children are ready. That can sort of just be an interim plan in the instance. And I think every business needs to have that interim plan. And then further down the track, you can actually, choose who's going to be the successor and get them ready as you get older. But the big issue is when you're actually referring to retirement, so many situations with family businesses, they're 80 and they have no intention of retiring. They have no plan in place because they don't plan to go anywhere. And to do it properly, you want at least 5 years. So the earlier, the better.
Is there a particular process that you use to start creating a succession plan?
We do. So we ensure that, so firstly, it's very important as an accredited advisor that we are independent. So the first thing we do is have a chemistry meeting with all members of the family to make sure that they're comfortable with the process and they see us as independent, not representing one family member. We then interview each family member one-on-one to get a really clear understanding of what they want the future to look like. We then do a workshop with all the family to ensure that we get an outcome and a resolution that everyone is happy with. And it creates us with a roadmap for the future. We then ensure that we have at least quarterly family council meetings to hold them accountable and to ensure it's implemented. Because we have found in the past that many families are happy to do the process and get the plan, but it's nearly just to appease the next generation. Then it just gets put on a shelf and nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
So if we really want to make change, we want to be involved and hold them accountable and help them to implement it.
What about growth? One of the things your research showed is that family businesses secure funding, but not many go for government funding. So where are they getting their funding from?
Well, that's the really interesting thing with family business is that they're very conservative in nature. So, and this is sort of where they went quite well during COVID. So family business, they don't like to invest unless they've built the funding to do it out of their own cash. So when we say that they're looking to acquire businesses, in many situations, they aren't looking to borrow from the bank. They would have saved up the funds. Now, obviously, we're talking about medium to large size business that's been in business for quite some time. But what you find with family business is in that first generation and when they first start their business, they will risk absolutely everything. They will put everything. So the bigger issues we have with first generation businesses is in many situations, they don't have any superannuation or any wealth outside of the business because they've put everything into this business to get it started and make it successful. But once they get through that phase and the business becomes quite successful, they become very conservative in nature. They never want to risk everything ever again. So they really start to build cash and ensure that they've got cash before they invest again. The only time that you might see them do something risky again is when it passes on to the next generation because they haven't gone through that really risky phase. So sometimes you see that they'll get a bit riskier again, and that can cause problems or it can lead to really huge growth once the business passes because their parents become quite conservative in the latter years.
Because acquisition is quite high on the list around growth around your survey, which is interesting given what we've just said.
Correct. And so it's the larger businesses, but yes, they will build up their wealth, and that helped them through COVID. And also once they came out of COVID, many of them did have quite a substantial amount of cash built up ready for what's happening in the market. We're keen.
So what about expansion into new markets and products, which is quite critical no matter what business you have? What type of areas are we seeing these businesses, family businesses in particular, move into?
The industries that were quite keen to expand in new items were manufacturing and also retail and consumer items. They were the main industries to look into new items. But one thing about family business is they're incredibly innovative, particularly in Australia. And it's interesting visiting some of the businesses because they might do manufacturing offshore, but they have a real innovation hub set up here in Australia. So it is quite an exciting area for Australian family businesses.
What about ESG? Because that's probably one of the areas that's quite new and everyone's talking about, and it's seen as a positive by most family businesses.
Yes, but this was an area that we were quite interested by our results in our survey. So one of the large areas that we found was they didn't understand a lot of the terminology. So when people are talking about ESG, they're really talking about what is being mandated and what is required to come into place. And look, a lot of large corporates are really just ticking a box to make sure that they comply. Whereas family business comes at it from a very different perspective. So they actually want to make change. They think for the long term. So a really great example is Bid, which is an Australian family business. So they're in the industry of mattresses. Now they don't want, and mattresses obviously make up a huge amount of landfill, and they want to change that. So they've just created a mattress now where every single component is recyclable. But people keep mattresses for 10 to 15 years. So this is a family business thinking of the legacy and the change that they want to make. And they have such a long-term perspective that they've created something now that they know will not make a difference until 10 to 15 years' time. And they're also not doing it to get a financial gain because it's not going to be profitable for them necessarily, but it's going to make a difference to the world. So that's what you're seeing with family businesses. And it's because they run their businesses from their heart, from their family values. So that's important to them. But then when you talk about ESG and the standards, a lot of it they just didn't understand because they can't ever imagine people going into business and modern slavery and things like that. They were very foreign terminology to them. Yeah, I found it really fascinating because it's like, look, we need to look at what they're doing because they're not about ticking a box and they're not going to understand all the terminology. But if you want to make real change, they're the ones to follow.
Yeah. And interesting that women are leading the charge around the positive impacts of sustainability in family-run businesses.
Yes, and I think that really supports the diversity aspect as well of why you need to ensure that you have diversity of thought around your boardroom table because women are coming from a very different perspective to men, and you want all those different perspectives around the table.
Talking about diversity, how are family businesses embracing diversity?
This was an area of our survey that actually led to quite a number of questions. So people called up and said, I don't know how you want me to answer these questions, but it was their way of thinking. So for example, if a family had all sons, they didn't think that they could have diversity. Or if they were in a female driven industry such as childcare, which is predominantly women, they felt that they couldn't offer diversity. But what we're trying to showcase is you can have non-executive board members or you can have an advisory board. There's different ways that you can bring diversity into your business. And I think that whole aspect of ESG and how women are more aligned with ESG just showcases it's important to have that diverse mindset around the table to be making the right decisions for the future for your family business.
What I found interesting about the survey is that family businesses are extremely successful in transferring generational wealth. And we are seeing the largest transfer of generational wealth in Australia in history. And we're not talking small amounts of money. We're talking about $3.5 trillion worth of wealth. But it is estimated, which I find really interesting, that 70% will lose inherited wealth by the second generation and 90% by the third generation. Like when you're talking that much money, I can't fathom how and why they're losing it.
Yeah, look, and this is something that we really want to change. So some of the research I saw recently is only 1 in 20 families pass on more wealth than what they inherited. The stakes just got a whole lot higher. When you're talking 3.5 trillion, we can't afford for this to be happening any longer. So there's a few areas there that we can see. So firstly, the rising gen, the next gen, in many situations have been very well educated. So they've gone to private schools, they've gone to universities. But an aspect that's really been missed is their financial acumen. So we at Grant Thornton have actually created a course to assist that next generation in really understanding the financial acumen so that when they do inherit the wealth that they can continue to grow it. And this is why the family governance and that communication piece is just so important. So an example is I met a family recently and mum is still alive. She has a huge property portfolio and she has 4 children. And I met one of the children and and I asked, is there a plan? Like, how are you and your siblings going to work together? Are all the assets being passed to yourselves jointly? And it was just something that they haven't considered, they haven't thought about. Mum's in her 80s and there's just been no conversation about what's going to happen next. But this is a really good time to do it because it enables the 4 siblings to talk about how they want to continue to grow the wealth whilst mum's still alive, so she can tell them what her thought process is and they can start to learn from her and how has she created this huge property portfolio over the years. A huge problem that we see is no one discusses anything. We still have a number of scenarios where people don't find out how the assets have been left until the will is read out. A lot of families don't understand the structures that are in place. So as you start to create more wealth and you have businesses, the corporate structure gets more and more complex. So you're finding that family members are writing a simple will, leaving 50% to both children or the business to one child and the wealth outside to another child, not realizing that the business is in a family trust and they don't own that asset. So there's a real piece of work that needs to be done there. And that's what we're trying to do is understand the vision of what they want to achieve, work out, have they got the right tax structure at the moment? Do we need to restructure for the future? And how do each of those entities need to be addressed in the estate plan to ensure that that vision is achieved and ensuring that the younger generation understand and can continue on with it as well.
Because you really do need to engage that next generation, don't you? Because otherwise you will see the second, third generation family businesses will not continue.
Yes, and it's interesting because in so many scenarios, you can see that the parents want to be fair, but fair and the best for the future doesn't necessarily mean leaving the business 50-50 to 2 children. You need to sort of look at what do both children want and how can you achieve fair and get the best result for everyone and allow the business to continue on for the future. The other thing that we do see is quite a big issue is people really, we family business, we have a 3-circle model where you talk about the owners, the family, and the business. And a lot of people get this all very confused. So what that means is if you're working inside the business, you should be paid a market salary for the role that you do. That does not entitle you to ownership. Ownership is totally separate. And where we see this gets very blurred is if you're paying all of your children the same salary from the business and some are working and some aren't, the ones that are working in the business are going to feel entitled to the ownership of the business. Or if you're paying one of your family members below an award wage and promising them this business will always be yours, they will feel entitled to the business. Whereas really, when you're working inside the business, you should be paid for the role you do. So if you're a director, you should be paid as being a director. If you're an employee or a general manager, you should be paid as a general manager. If in the market, your role would mean that if you grow the business, that you get a bonus for helping grow the business, that's what you should get in the family business. So that ownership and a dividend policy can go to family members who are in the business and outside as well, because it's a totally different aspect of the business. And this is where so many families blur all those lines.
Gee, it's complicated, isn't it? When you think about it, like you start up a business and it becomes successful and you think this is a great structure, wealth, legacy that I can pass on to the next generation, but it requires so much planning and structure and thought around it, and it's easily can go wrong.
Yeah, and what we find is a lot of families, they get so involved in the operation of the business, and they feel incredibly, we hear it time and time again, they feel so lonely. They feel that it's only their family that has any of these issues, but they're so focused in the operation of the business that they're not actually They're not aware there's anyone out there to help them. They don't actually ever take a step out and go, how do we set this up? They're just so involved in the operational. And in saying that, the economy itself has thrown so many things at them over recent years that you can understand. They're nearly going from sort of one fire to the next, to the next, to the next. You can understand why it is hard to stop and think, okay, how do we think about the family and how do we set this up? So what we find is the clients that come to us the most are ones where there was a really bad transition from one generation to the next, and they never want that to happen again for their children. They're sort of like our best clients ever because they can see it's worth the investment to get it right. Or alternatively, if there's sort of been a death or an illness in the family or a very close friend, sometimes that can be the trigger point that they just realize we need to focus a bit less on the operational and start working on our family. They're sort of the trigger points where they'll step a little bit outside of the operation of the business.
When are you doing your next survey?
Oh, we're looking at it at the moment. What we would really like to delve a little bit more into, and you've touched on it with the whole 3.5 trillion transitioning, but that rising gen. So we'd really like to find a little bit more information around where are they struggling? How are they going? Are they ready to take on the wealth? I think there's a lot of interesting information to obtain from them.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting talking to you and learning so much more about the operational side of family businesses and some of the issues that they're facing and some of the great stuff that they do as well. I look forward to your next survey coming out. Maybe we can catch up and have a chat about it then as well.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you for your time.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast, and don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.